The dissemination of glorified images of criminals as bait for those who also crave popularity acts as a filter, screening out those unsuitable for the role of perpetrator, and infecting those with the active trigger that sets off the program's unpacking. Another filter is the specific method of selecting themes through which the program components for executing a school shooting are embedded. These themes are chosen from the areas of interest to teenagers, which are typically opposite in nature. What does this mean, and why is it done? A person is more likely to be interested in related topics. For example, someone interested in astronautics might also be interested in parachuting. However, to minimize the number of people caught in the cross-section of the informational coding waves, topics are chosen that rarely fall within the sphere of interest of the same person all at once. For instance, a teenager might be fascinated by space and the possibility of life on other planets, such as astrobiology. What would be opposite in nature to this interest? Life's opposite is death. So, a teenager potentially suitable for the role of a shooter might also be interested in different models of weapons. This combination of interests is rare in real life, which is precisely what anti-cultism representatives count on. Subsequently, various materials on these themes are embedded with other components of the single program for carrying out a school shooting. Particular emphasis is placed on awakening an interest in weapons as tools that grant power and fame. As a result, only those teenagers who are simultaneously interested in both opposing themes and who already have a dominant desire for fame and recognition fall into the crosshairs of these intersecting waves of information coding. Thus, the target group gradually narrows down through the final stage of the coding process. The first wave of information coding affects thousands. Then from these thousands, only hundreds remain, and ultimately, only a few individuals are caught in the crossfire of all the necessary coding waves. It then becomes a matter of time to see who among them activates first, and who ultimately becomes the perpetrator of the implanted program. This is why shooters often appear entirely different from one another, with diametrically opposed personality traits, frequently without significant psychological issues, and most importantly, without apparent motives for committing such crimes.
Let me give you an example of an inducing wave of information coding that activates a teenager's program to commit a school shooting. The start command doesn't necessarily come through the media or the internet. It could be delivered by a guest lecturer at the school who incidentally mentions a person in their talk who dedicated their entire life to science but never gained worldwide recognition or fame. In contrast, the lecturer then cites Nobel laureates as examples, few in number, but they were able to achieve success. What embed does the potential shooter receive here? Their subconscious gets the directive that neither science nor diligent effort brings fame, and that life's meaning isn't in discoveries or hard work, but in popularity. For if no one knows you, you're wasting your life. Therefore, there's no point to your existence. From an outside perspective, such a lecture might seem noble, yet it serves as the trigger for activating the shooter. After a short period, one of the students at this school will commit an armed attack on others. Several months may pass between the lecture and the tragic event, by which time no one will remember or connect the person to the reasons for this tragedy. From a legal standpoint, there's no grounds for charges of incitement because the lecturer didn't even mention school shootings in their talk. In this way, through purposeful information coding, the subconscious program for committing mass murder is activated in the teenager unnoticed by others. Thus, out of thousands of teenagers affected by intersecting waves of information coding, only a few become future shooters. This transformation occurs only in schools where the final stage of subconscious programming, the activation phase of the embedded command, has been completed. That's why, seemingly out of nowhere, children develop an attraction to weapons and a desire to inflict harm on others. Just an image that bypassed the critical perception of the conscious mind, penetrated deep into the subconscious, and triggered action. As a result, a teenager who recently made plans for the future dreamed of romantic relationships. and chose a university or college to attend after school, suddenly, with the obsession of a psychopath, starts planning a real terrorist attack. Thus, cynically and cold-bloodedly, representatives of anti-cultism skillfully manipulate the pliable minds of future executors for their malicious intent. They turn your children into terrorists and mass murderers. Even if only one out of hundreds of thousands of children brings this image to life, it is more than enough for representatives of anti-cultism and the force behind them to continue their destructive activities to destabilize society and impose the agendas that benefit them. Representatives of anti-cultism, in their public statements, which they also make in educational institutions, often talk about their concern for the safety of children. However, it is they themselves who are the secret instigators, provoking children to display outbursts of hatred, intolerance, and aggression. It is the representatives of anti-cultism who create conditions in society for children, and sometimes even adults, to take up arms and go shoot other children in schools. Being terrorists themselves, they breed new terrorists. Thus, through the hands of others, they achieve the desired results.
Ways to prevent school shootings.
Understanding the fundamental principles of manipulative techniques through which the search and activation of potential shooters occur also provides the opportunity to identify the organizers of such crimes and prevent similar incidents in the future. How to prevent school shootings.
Method 1. Monitoring content leading to crime. For example, by tracking the content that teenagers who commit mass shootings have been exposed to, it is possible to uncover those who led them to these actions, using them as remotely controlled weapons. This includes identifying specific publications, harmful content, and even particular media channels through which children are encoded to commit school shootings. It is worth noting that identifying potentially harmful content in this case is possible only through its external features. Without specialized knowledge of the puzzle coding method, an ordinary person will not be able to detect hidden puzzle embeds in text or video materials, which ultimately transform someone into a shooter. Since this method is designed to influence a person's subconsciousness, bypassing critical perception by the conscious mind, it's logical that it is almost impossible to understand where and how these embeds occur if you use consciousness alone. But what can be noticed, and what should be paid attention to when identifying dangerous content? Since heroization of shooters is the first and fundamental wave of information coding, which lays the groundwork in a person's subconsciousness for committing a future crime, we will now provide an analysis of publications on the topic of school shootings. The first thing to observe in these materials is the frequency of publications that repeat the same seemingly meaningless messages. This may be a series of similar articles about a specific school shooting incident that happened a long time ago. Often, these articles are authored by a specific periodical, journalist, or a group of interconnected journalists who continually maintain the same topics in their publications over an extended period of time. Meanwhile, other journalists or media outlets may have already stopped covering this event long ago. Yet this very group of journalists persistently supports the information wave for unknown reasons, and keeps the long-past event alive in the media space. These articles would repeatedly discuss the same subject from different angles. The authors might criticize the police, express sympathy for the shooter's parents, highlight recently uncovered details of the crime, and so on. However, the common thread will still be the same: school shootings. And all these articles will have one significant feature: they will never harshly criticize or condemn the shooter. The second feature of potentially dangerous materials and publications is that discussions of school shootings would always be accompanied by direct or indirect criticism of the authorities, specific officials, and the helplessness of law enforcement agencies. articles would discuss their mistakes and failures, emphasizing that law enforcement officers lie and deliberately distort facts to cover up their own helplessness. Such publications often appear very similar, and at first glance may even seem reasonable, devoid of aggressive calls to action or clear signs of inciting hatred. However, in reality, the information they contain deeply affects people, leaving a lasting imprint on their subconsciousness. The third feature to watch for is the presence of numbers in the publications. Information containing hidden embeds always includes a numerical code. This could be mentions of dates, exact time when a crime was committed, the number of casualties, or other figures. Yet these numbers would be repeatedly referenced in their publications. The point is that human consciousness and subconsciousness perceive numbers differently. This feature of the work of our subconsciousness is leveraged by the puzzle coding method. As mentioned before, it is extremely challenging for an unprepared individual to detect hidden manipulations of consciousness, and, even more so, subconsciousness, through the puzzle coding method without specialized training. However, there is always a pattern, and identifying this pattern can help pinpoint particularly dangerous content amid the vast flow of information. Once sources of destructive influence containing hidden embeds are identified, it is crucial to promptly halt the propagation of their influence on the broader population. Method 2. Conducting psychological testing in schools to identify increased levels of bipolar disorders. One indicator that students at a particular educational institution have been subjected to hidden external subconscious manipulation is an increase in cases of bipolar affective disorder among them. What's the connection here? Since the initial waves of information coding have a wide radius of impact, certain embeds, parts of the program for mass shootings, infiltrate the subconscious of all affected individuals. What happens to a person in this case? Hidden directives start acting in their subconscious, conflicting with their conscious goals and aspirations. As a result, internal conflict and resistance emerge within the individual. This conflict, triggered by the implanting of foreign elements into the subconscious, eventually manifests as bipolar disorder. Representatives of anti-cultism cannot avoid provoking such conditions when they initiate preparatory waves of coding for school shootings, because this forms the foundation for further imposition of other waves, ultimately launching the program. An illustrative example in this regard is the situation in the Czech Republic, where after the shooting incident at the Faculty of Philosophy of Charles University in Prague in 2023, pertinent information emerged regarding the prevalence of bipolar disorders among the country's young generation. Czech media began disseminating information indicating that approximately 5% of the entire population of the Czech Republic currently suffers from bipolar affective disorder, primarily among the young generation of the Czech shooters' age, namely students.